Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome back. So today we're going to go through 3 different stock plays that I think could actually be great options plays instead. So we'll go through 3 different stocks that I think will perform well in the medium to long term. And the reason why I'm interested in buying options instead of shares is because, as many of you have noticed, the stock market, particularly growth stocks, have dropped quite dramatically in terms of price recently, and I'm running a little bit low on cash. So buying calls instead of shares is my way to grab a larger position in a company that I believe in with the same amount of money in exchange for taking on slightly more risk. And just as a disclaimer before I begin, I'm not a financial advisor and this is not financial advice. Options are a lot riskier than shares. So if you're brand new to the stock market, I would not recommend you go anywhere near options. So even for me, the ones that we're going to go through today, no matter what company it is, I'm buying like a really long dated call, which means that they don't expire for a while. So sometimes they're called LEAPs, which stands for long-term equity anticipation securities. And for those of you unfamiliar, LEAPs are basically like the least risky types of options if you're going to play options. So if you have no experience in options but would like to find out more, I actually did a video explaining the basics of options, so feel free to give that a watch. I'm not going to bore you guys by explaining everything again. So I'm just going to assume that you have a basic understanding of how options work, or if you haven't, please go watch my options basics videos before you watch this video. So yeah, I'm not going to repeat all the basics for the rest of this video. So anyways, without further ado, let's jump in. Before I begin though, let me go through some of the criteria that I'm looking for when I'm picking these options. So obviously number 1 is I have to believe in the underlying company, right? So I typically only buy calls and not puts, so I'm making a long bet on a company. Secondly, I'm looking for stocks that have a low sticker price. And what I mean by that is that the price per share of the stock, I like to keep under $100 per share. Now, I always say that the sticker price of a stock doesn't really matter because you can have like 1 share of a stock that's worth $1,000, or you can have 10 shares of a stock that's worth $100. It doesn't really change the value of the company, right? Like the sticker price of the stock doesn't influence the valuation, and fundamentally it doesn't matter. However, when it comes to options, it does matter a bit. For example, Tesla stock is around, I don't know, $600 or so per share right now, which means that if I go look for a January 2023 call, like this one, for example, right now, the last price that I traded for was over $200 per option. And remember that options are traded in contracts, which are batches of 100. So for one contract, I'd have to pay over $20,000, which unfortunately, I just don't have that kind of cash on me right now. Ideally, I'm looking to spend maybe about $2,000 per contract. I think that's a sweet spot because remember, I'm in Canada. So over here in Canada, there are still commissions for buying and selling options. So I don't want to buy too many contracts because they do charge a flat fee and like a variable fee on top of that. So you have to pay a minimum flat fee whenever you buy or sell an option contract. And then you have to pay like, I don't know, $1 or $1.25 or something per contract. So if you buy like 10 contracts, then you have to pay like $10 extra plus the $10 flat fee. So you'll be paying like $20 per trade if you're buying like 10 options at once, right? Or 10 contracts of options at once. So yeah, I know it's annoying here in Canada. I think that you guys, if you're watching this from America, you guys have it a lot better off, but this is just the way that it works in Canada, okay? So anyways, that is the second criteria, that the stock price itself should be around $100 or less ideally. And lastly, I do want to find something that has options premiums that are not too high. Because remember, options pricing is determined by volatility. So that means if a stock is extremely volatile, then options tend to get more expensive. And this actually applies to both calls and puts. So this would rule out something like AMC. I'm sorry guys, like I know you don't kill me. I know you guys love AMC, but I'm just going to sit this one out because every day is either up like 20% or down 20% at least. And yeah, I already have a decent chunk of my net worth in crypto, which is also very volatile. So I'm not looking to add even more volatility to my portfolio at this moment. So AMC options are definitely out of the criteria, or I'm not even going to touch the shares, to be honest, because it's a little too much and it's a little bit too speculative for me at the moment. So yeah, anyways, with all these criteria and picking options on those, what have I chosen? Well, number one pick, I'm just going to jump straight into it. Number one pick is AMD, Advanced Micro Devices. So I talked about AMD before on this channel, and I'm sure some of you are aware of the pretty big semiconductor shortage right now. So in terms of demand, I think that for the foreseeable future, we're going to have really high demand for anything in the semiconductor space. So pretty much anything in the semiconductor space will do relatively well if they can, keep up with the demand. So I know a lot of you pointed out last time that I mentioned AMD that you'd rather buy Intel because Intel makes their own chips versus AMD just designs them and then orders them from TSMC. But I think that at the end of the day, both business models can work very well. You don't absolutely need to manufacture your own chips to succeed. So if you don't believe me, a prime example of this is Apple with their new M series ARM processors, which are all made by TSMC as well, I believe. But Apple owns the intellectual rights to the design of the chips. And as a result, no one can copy them. And Apple is the clear leader right now in the ARM CPU space. And if you're wondering why I didn't pick TSMC stock instead, well, I could. And I think that they're a great company too. But I just find myself, and I think the broader market, identifying more with a brand that is AMD. So I think that there's just more upside potential with AMD since they're just getting into the GPU space. So that's a whole new market for them that they weren't really that involved in before. I know they had GPUs before, but it's not like they're getting and expanding into the space a lot more now than they were before. So I feel like they haven't reached their full potential yet in the GPU space. So in terms of CPUs, they're just running in circles around Intel, right? So from a price to performance perspective, don't just take my word for it. Ask anyone who knows anything about computers, and they'll have to admit, even if they're an Intel fanboy, that AMD has been extremely disruptive in the CPU space. That was previously just dominated by Intel. So yes, if you compare things like PE ratios and sort of other valuation metrics, AMD is going to trade higher to Intel, but at the same time, I think it deserves to because it is clearly the more innovative and more disruptive and higher growth company compared to Intel. So obviously, you're going to have to pay a premium to have that growth. So in particular, though, which contract am I looking at? Well, for example, maybe something like this. So these are January 2023 calls with a strike of around $60 per share, and it's trading at about $27 per option right now. So one contract would cost about $2,700. So if you just multiply that by 100, what I'm looking for though is a high delta, and this one has a delta of over 0.8. So if you need a reminder of what delta is, it's a correlation between the price of the option and the underlying stock. So you want this to be high because you want the option to respond well to the price movements of the stock itself. So in this case, if the stock goes up by 1%, then these options will go up by 0.8%. So if you ever bought an option, specifically a call, and you're wondering why the stock didn't move while the stock is moving up, then they probably bought an option with too low of a delta. So that was the problem. So anyways, that's AMD. Now moving on. The next stock on the list is Palantir. PLTR is the ticker, and I've also talked about Palantir a lot in the past. So I've called it a 10x potential stock, and I still stand by what I said despite the stock price falling quite a bit since the last time I covered it. In fact, I think that the video that I made about Palantir was the most watched video on this channel ever. It got over 10,000 views, which absolutely a big thank you to you guys for everyone who watched that video and hit the like button. Hit the like button on this video, by the way. It really helps out with the YouTube algorithm. But yeah, anyways, that Palantir video absolutely blew up. So big thank you to you guys. And many of you may have even subscribed because you saw that video. As to why I think that Palantir has so much potential, is the fact that Palantir's products, their use cases are so broad, right? So if you're unfamiliar with Palantir, they do in-depth data analysis for things like national defense, supply chain management, management, cybersecurity, you name it. Right? And if you recall, a while back, there was a cyber attack on a oil pipeline in the United States called the Colonial Pipeline attack, and they had to shut down the entire pipeline for days, which led to a gas shortage on almost the entirety of the East Coast United States. So in the end, the company actually decided to pay the hackers millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin in order to regain access to their data. So I thought that that was the end of the story. But then weeks later, it turned out that the FBI actually managed to recover most of the stolen funds, and it isn't exactly clear how they did so. But it was widely rumored that Palantir was involved in getting the stolen funds back. So side note, a lot of crypto critics claim that Bitcoin is used by criminals and is used by ransomware, blah, blah, blah. But I think that this actually proves that Bitcoin is not such a great tool to be used by criminals because, again, everything could be traced, right? The blockchain is completely public. Everything is transparent. If this ransom was paid in cash, like USD cash, well then good luck getting it back, right? So anyways, I digress. I really like Palantir because I think it's just a matter of time before we see the stock price rise as the demand for things like data analytics is only going to go up in the future. I think that a contract that I'm interested in getting might be something like this. So these are once again 2023 calls. So same idea, super high delta, and arguably I might be playing it too safe here because these options are really deep in the money. So if you want a bit more leverage, you can look for something with slightly higher of a strike price, which will be cheaper. So remember, leverage is the reason why we're playing options in the first place, right? So Palantir is just under $25 per share right now. So if you were to buy 100 shares, you'd have to spend about $2,500. But if you buy a contract of these calls, which controls 100 shares, you'd only spend about $1,500. So that's the beauty of options, that it buys you the same upside as owning the underlying shares, but you have to put up less money up front. So yeah, that's Palantir. Moving on, number 3, lastly, we have Dropbox. Ticker symbol DBX. Now, I know there's a lot of other YouTubers shilling this stock right now, so let me give my 2 cents on it as well, okay? So first, I think that the problem facing Dropbox is that it's just not as sexy of a company as, say, like a Tesla or a Palantir, right? So Tesla's revolutionizing the EV industry, and Palantir is helping the FBI catch cyber criminals. And if you look at Dropbox, you're like, oh, it's just a cloud storage company. But I think that if you look deeper, you'll find that cash flow is like a huge thing at Dropbox, right? Dropbox is a cash flow machine, and it's one of the biggest players in a growing industry, and it's not being priced like a growth stock. So last time I checked, the 4 PE on it is at like 20 or less than 20, which is very low for a company that's putting up double-digit revenue growth year over year, and it's consistently beating analyst estimates. It also owns HelloSign, which is the second biggest player in the digital signing space. By the way, for the record, the biggest player right now in the digital signing space is DocuSign, which is a $50 billion company, and Dropbox as a whole is only worth like $11 billion in total. Granted, DocuSign, I say, is in a very distant first place in terms of digital signing, so I don't foresee HelloSign overtaking them or anything in the near future, but looking at relative valuations between DocuSign and Dropbox, I just like Dropbox a lot more. And as to which contract I'm looking at, I actually own some Dropbox options already, and they're performing quite well for me so far. So these are once again January 2023 calls, basically the longest dated ones that are available right now with a strike of 10. So they're pretty deep in the money right now. And since these have gone up a lot in price since I bought them, if I were to buy more, I'd maybe consider getting something with a higher strike price so that I don't have to pay as much upfront. But at the same time, you might not want to do too high of a strike price because then the risk is higher. So maybe something like this, right? So these are, everything else is the same, expiration date the same, but with a strike at 15 instead of 10. And as you can see, they're a lot cheaper, but still have super high delta. And once again, I recommend you don't go too far out of the money on this one, and this is because of a risk that you might not have thought of. So the risk is that Dropbox might get acquired. So you say, hey, wait a minute, isn't that a good thing? Well, yes, but actually no. So it is a good thing if you have in the money calls or if you have shares. But here's what can happen if you're out of the money, right? So if you have options that are out of the money, so say if stock price of Dropbox is at $30 right now and they get acquired for $40 per share, and you own calls with a strike of $50 per share, well, then your calls are going to go down 99%, right? Why? This is because, well, if you have calls that are redeemable at $50 per share and they get acquired at $40 per share, that means that the stock price will never hit 50, right? You'll never be in the money because they're getting bought out at 40. So the only chance that your calls could be worth something is that if the deal falls through and then the stock price somehow rises above 40 to like $50 after the deal falls through, which is like highly unlikely, I think, because usually when a company has like a deal that's already been announced, and that means that everyone's kind of okay with the valuation already. So if that happens, if they get acquired for $40 a share, then that means that even if the deal falls through, it probably won't hit 50 anytime soon. So now you have a situation where you're right on Dropbox, right? They did really well. So they went, let's say, from $30 to $40 per share instantly in this scenario, but you still lose all your money because you spend all your money on too far out of the money calls. So you never want to be in a situation like this, right? So you never want to be in a situation where you're right and you still lose all your money and you're down like 98, 99%. But this is what can happen though if you go too far out of the money. So I'm going to stick with in the money calls for now. So yeah, anyways, those are my 3 options picks. And if you have options picks, let me know. Or if you just have stock picks, let me know down in the comments as well. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you guys think. So I'll leave the video here for now. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed the video and consider subscribing if you like this series. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, links down below in the description as always. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.